I would like to welcome you to a introduction of my N-scale Southern Pacific produce row subdivision layout. This layout is set in Portland, Oregon, in East Portland, which represents the very northern end or eastern end in Southern Pacific parlance's system. This represents really from Brooklyn Yard all the way up to the terminus with the Union Pacific up at Union Station. This particular layout is set in 1955. I do have some options to do some a little further era in 1965 with some minor structure changes, and I'll probably have a video probably later eventually on that particular topic. The layout, as you can see here, this is made up of T-Trax modules, of which about half of them are standard modules, end caps, and doubles and triples. And some of them here, like the one you're seeing right here, this yard module and its companion modules we'll get to eventually on the other side of the layout, is a custom linked module. It's made of a double and a triple T-Trax modules together. This layout actually replaces a larger layout that used to occupy this whole half of the garage here, where this layout sits. On the same theme was large, point-to-point transfer yards, things like that. Unfortunately, over time, some potential threatened moves, and just I was getting really tired of having to crawl underneath the layout and work on things like switch machines and detector boards. It was one thing doing track wiring, but just all that, the electronics and having to get up in a cramped spaces, it didn't become fun anymore. So I kind of lost interest in it after a time. But the advantage of T-Trax modules, as some of you probably know, if you ever want to work on things, all we have to do is literally just lift. You could lift it up, put it on a workbench, or like I said, look here, flip the thing on its back and do all the wiring. In fact, you can see here, I'm starting to wire up for the main bus wires now. So I had this thing flipped on its side earlier. The layout here is powered by Digitrax, Zephyr system. As for the main command station and booster, and we'll be having a Tam Valley booster run an accessory bus, which will power the hex frog juicers needed for a lot of the turnouts, plus a number of the switch machines. Will be using the Walthers layout control system, horizontal mount servo-based switch machines. These have servos, and they have contacts for frog power, and they also have a internal DCC accessory type decoder. So I'll be able to operate the switches from a fascia control, whether it be a toggle or a push button, or I can use it by a DCC throttle. So it's very customizable. I will kind of step around the layout from south to north and kind of describe what's going on here. Representing Brooklyn Yard here. At the far end here, this is going to be staging. This end cap here is all for staging, so it's painted brown. I probably could paint it black, but we're going to have here eventually at the end of here, there will be a backdrop right here, and we'll have a bridge, which be the Holgate Avenue Bridge, which crossed over here in the mid-50s, was a 2-lane structure on plate girders. Bridge, so we'll cross about right here. The rest of the stuff here will be somewhat scenic back behind here, so it'll look like it doesn't look like a tunnel effect. So here I'll start describing here. We have Brooklyn Yard. It's obviously very compact. You're not necessarily prototype here. It does have some of the elements of the prototype here and there. The irony of this is that the yard ladder here, the classification tracks, I literally I found I could lifted them off the other layout. I could drop the whole thing on here, so it actually saved me a lot of time when I get there, because all of these tracks will literally be one piece. So this first track right here is kind of it looks like a siding. It could be used as such, but it's really representing. It's kind of more of a fiddle track, staging track that represents the north end of the system, Northern Pacific's Lake Yard, or the Northern Pacific Terminal Yard, which was opposite Portland Union Station. This also could represent Union Station, a holding track there for passenger trains. So they become something sitting here to represent that northern end. I mean, more likely train would come and I would fiddle it off and put it into car boxes and probably stick them in over a shelf like down under here. The next track over is the main line, and then we have this would be our arrival departure track. This is actually the inside loop track of this T-track oval in here. Even though it is an oval and we don't have potentially for a continuous run, there's I'm not going to run it. I'm not going to run it as such. In this part here, it's arrival departure track. Down on this other end, down over here, it's a staging track lead. At the other end over here, this represents a yard lead, and then the further we get to the other end, represents industry tracks when we get to the other side. So then we'll have a arrival departure track. This third track in, fourth track in, could be another arrival departure or staging track lead, because it does represent these other lines here. And then we'll have at least about 3 or 4 classification tracks. Short track here is a caboose track. Then the yard lead, and we have this kind of a switchback here. It will serve the Railway Express Agency building here. And the next track over was to be the engine house lead. Probably going to do a design change since I moved things around here to accommodate the REA building. This building, I originally had it in my Union Station module, but I want it here to get this kind of interest using like passenger trains for like baggage cars and things like that. I'm going to do so. I'll do the proper thing here and make this a crossover kind of a thing, and this allowed me to create a full runaround of a yard lead and the yard ladder bypass, as a lot of larger yards have. And then here, it's kind of the very compact engine terminal. So what we have here is going to be a 100-foot girder turntable by building it from a diamond scale. So it's kind of, we got the motor drive built, and it's pretty much now, I'm still kind of, the first hard part of it is putting the pit rail in. So that's the next step there. And then about here we'll have the engine, a single track engine lead. Then we'll have the sand house, water tank, you can see here. Then I'll have the sand track and the fuel track off the turntable. I'd rather not do that, but there's just not the room to put the rest of it in here. And we'll have a spur in here for some shop buildings and some of the shops, because Brooklyn up here was the railroad's car shops up here. So there was lots of always freight cars being built, and those huge packs of lumber and things like that, and materials stored here. So I'd like to have some of that simulated. All right, moving on. As I said, this is the turntable, the hole for the turntable pit. And then the next here, we are going to be putting here, there'll be a model of the Brooklyn Yard's big house. They're a four-stall roundhouse that was basically, everything was originally 100 feet long. There originally was a smaller turntable here. When they built the larger turntable, they had this 4-stall roundhouse bit. The 4-stall roundhouses was most recently in the past where 4449 was stored. The SP&S 700 was stored. Here's we'll have a 4-track roundhouse here. We'll have a couple garden tracks in and around here, so it'll be enough to hold the equipment, and that will be used on the layout during a operation session. Here is basically a representation here of the machine shops. Gives into there was back shops and machine shops here in the 1950s. So this one's kind of painted to represent SP colors, and it's basically the top half of one of Walther's Vulcan Manufacturing. I just cut off the first story here. So this represents machine shop and the water tower. And then in and around this area in here, and some of this blank area here, will probably be a whole mess of shop buildings, they're sort of, sheds, shacks, storage, you know, stores, supplies, whatever. Not quite sure exactly what's all going to go there. There might have a road here with some commercial street or something like that. There were some parallel roadways in the area, so I might do some of that. Not quite sure. It's a little bit open for now. Okay, kind of moving on around here down the main line here. Now we've actually come around. This is actually the kind of I'm calling this Brooklyn. I call this kind of Brooklyn Terminal. This area here represents the industries that were in and around the Brooklyn Yard, and so, for instance, this is the other part of the the oval track here. In this section here, this will represent the ice dock. The ice dock and the ice plant will be right here. Right, and then here, where this piece of track here I got sitting right here, this will be a short spur with a ramp on the end. This will represent the first original SP's TFC track. And as we come along here, so we have those two industries, and then I have this track right in front here. This spur track here will represent one. We have a representation of Brooklyn's cattle pens. They had stock pens here. The middle riddle right here, we will put there will be a coal yard. It was a place that you could drop off, dumped coals through a hatch in through here, and then there was the coal yard did not have any piles outside. The vehicles kind of drove in, and the coal was loaded in vehicles inside of a building. And then here, this track will be extended a bit onto this module a bit, and this will represent a team track, all of which existed. Then we have the switchback spur here, and this will serve a couple places. One, the most biggest things here are these large, gas holders or gasometers. So these were very large on the Portland skyline. We look towards you could definitely see them on the east side, as well as a number of other places in town. Then this track here will be extended a bit further. Here, there was actually a LPG tanks in here. So the 1950s versions, those Atlas 40-foot LPG tank cars. So that's what would be going here. We'll have an industry there. And then we have up here, this building here is what was originally built as the Ford building. This was built by the Ford Motor Company. This is a scratch-built structure meant to match the current structure that exists. This again, it was built by the Ford Motor Company. It has a large elevator tower on the top, mainly because when they were building Model A's here, they stored all the completed vehicles on the roof. And there were a lot of them. They were all shipped out through the loading doors down here. I do have a water tower that's packed away to go on top of this as well. And then see on here, there's a short spur down here in the bottom here. This will be a Copeland lumber. If anybody familiar with the Northwest, potentially familiar with the Copeland lumber with the characteristic black cat logo, kind of the orange type thing. So that's going to be a small, lumber yard here. All right, we're going to continue on here. As I mentioned here, there's our, lumber track here. I have to extend this spur here. It's a little too short. We'll extend it a bit onto this module here. The track here behind the lumber yard will also be extended slightly. This will terminate. This was actually Portland General Electric's pole yard. So we'll have some pole yards, cable reels, things like that going off the end there. You can just see in the picture here, there's a substation here, and then we have the powerhouse right here. This powerhouse is currently, the building is still there today as part of the Oregon Museum of Science and Industry, just south of where I-5 crosses the Willamette Bridge over the Markham Bridge. And so that's a model of the building that was there at the time. Then there's this large embankment you see sitting across the tracks here. This is actually off the previous layout. These sitting kind of more or less in the same position. It has to get cut back, so I can allow to put a bridge a bridge in place eventually. And here I got to bring down the structure here. Had to show us one of my other videos, but this is a model of the Grand Avenue Viaduct that was here in the time. It was torn down a number of years ago. But this structure here is obviously, you can see it's too long, so we will have to shorten it to fit this space. And then just back in here is the East Portland warehouse. That building there is kind of a mock. It was kind of done for some a website challenge kind of a thing, but it is not really resembling the actual structure, other than maybe some of the arched windows on the first floor. So that one eventually will be rebuilt. And then you can see here, there is this track. We've got this track coming across here. That track actually represents the Spokane, Portland, Seattle Railroad. It kind of was the river, and then it was basically joint with UP, and then it diverged from the Union Pacific on 2nd Street, kind of cut diagonally across a block to 3rd, went down 3rd Street, and then turned a 90-degree angle towards the river, and then crossed over the UP's 2nd Street line, and then the SP's line on 1st Street. So that's what this represents. This point, the SP called this SP&S Crossing. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a dummy crossing set up here, and there'll be dwarf signals in place that always be lit. So the SP&S line will always be red, and there'll always be green for the SP. So it could just a scenic detail, but important to have. Okay, so we kind of had to change positions here on the other side of the table here. So what we're going to get here is this is the Holman Transfer Company here warehouse. This warehouse was sitting down on Water Street. It was actually served by the SP&S, but it's important landmark structure. In fact, it's one of the few structures of significance that's still there today, that was not blown away by the freeway construction in 1958. And then we have this building here, you can see here, which is basically just mat board right now. This building is the Hudson Duncan building. It is just a cold storage warehouse, and at the time, it was the Portland warehouse for Piggly Wiggly grocery stores. So the Oregon did have Piggly Wigglies, and of course most of that chain is now retreated to back east at this point. And then right here on the backdrop here, really can't see it here, but it'll just be a flat. It'll kind of come out a little bit further in here. This will represent off the same spur which connects here will be Northwestern Ice and Cold Storage. It's another large ice plant for bagged ice, as well as sorted frozen sort of foods, veggies, whatever at the time. So we'll have place for a number of refrigerator cars and things like that. Just as a point of reference here is that, if you're familiar with Portland here, where my ruler sits here right off the edge of the layout here, this is where I-5 would be running today. There were numerous warehouses and wharves that branched out into the river right in here. And then when they built the freeway in 58, they really raised all of those warehouses. And the river was actually, now it's a bit narrower now than it was, because the I-5 is all sitting on fill. So this is basically where I-5 is running right now. So things like Hudson Duncan was actually on the other side. He was out over here somewhere, and that actually one of the buildings that was lost. So now as we're gonna be getting into East Portland itself here, the first part of it. And then here, so what we have here is the main line comes in here. So it said this for the ice for these cold storage warehouses. This box kind of represents the location of the SP's freight house. So we'll have a spur here, which will be able to hold things like overnight box cars and other merchandise cars here. This was also part of part of the railroad's namesake here, Produce Row. This was where all the produce terminal was in here. So this line here, you can see here, will represent part of that produce terminal. So we'll have assorted, ice reefers sitting here with trucks loading up directly from the refrigerator cars, right here. And then coming back here, coming in toward the back here, will be 2nd Street. This will be these will be Union Pacific tracks back here. That will serve a number of potential some industries here. I have an old grain elevator here that was technically mothballed by the 50s. There's a number. I have a number of options back here. There's flour mill. There's got tire warehouses. Brewery brewery type of infrastructure. Just sort of mess of warehouses in here. So I have to kind of figure out what's the best thing to fit in this particular location here. Continuing on here a bit. So again, that UP 2nd Street line will run right along the edge here on the switchback. And I have this Unitrack label here, this package. This will represent here, we're standing right here, will represent the location of the Burnside Bridge. This is a bridge across the Willamette River and across the yards right about here. And so this will require a number of 3D printed parts and things like ricks, railings, and things like that to work here. So it'll probably be an eventual future video here on its construction. So it'll be generally in about this area. Then continuing along the back here, this spur back here will serve a furniture warehouse. Actually, it'll be a warehouse that was originally built as a furniture warehouse. It became a World War II dormitory, and then now in the 50s here, it's actually serving Sears as their storage warehouse, and then part of it's actually rented out to Maryland Pacific Cone, who made all those neat little ice cream cones. And then we have this building here. This building here is with its own spur track in front. This is a representation of the Safeway Produce Warehouse. This building here was torn out in 1958 because there are a number of freeway ramps that go between I-5 and I-84 that cut right across this place. So we'll have Safeway trucks and more places to put refrigerator cars. The spur here, the kind of running down in front here, this will actually represent one of the wharf terminals. So this actually was the SP had a long lumber wharf, which I had modeled on the previous layout. Here we'll still have a room instead of like 6 cars. We'll have a room for about 2 or 3 here. This is where they put rough lumber onto ships out of flat cars and gondolas. And I have this Sylvan Models Laker freighter here, which is pretty similar to freighters of the 50s. I'm going to we'll have a piece of riverbed that'll go about right in here. So this will look like a ship that's sitting here at the wharf, but it'll be removable if I ever need to move that particular module. All right, moving down to the last piece. This represents here, here's kind of a mock-up here of the junction here between the SP and the UP. This is a real life is a Y junction here, and generally most of the legs modeled here. So for instance, first piece we'll have this inside track here will represent the Union Pacific. So this track kind of goes crosses through the backdrop, and it'll just dead end. It will not connect. And this represents a place I could stage a locomotive and some cars representing interchange traffic. Onto the UP, this is going toward Union Pacific's Albina yard. And then along the backside here, we'll have the inside main line. We'll either our continuous run piece will cut through here. And this will kind of represent the third part of the Y that would come from Albina yard onto the steel bridge towards Union Station. So this kind of represents this other third part of the Y. There was a tower in the middle of the Y, somewhat underneath the bridge. Here's a piece of the original steel bridge that overpassed a viaduct that was on the east side of the river here, which I built for the last layout. I'll have to rebuild this for this layout because it obviously doesn't fit here. But this will tend to go in about this position here. So you'll see we'll have the trains coming around this sharp, about 15-mile-an-hour curve or less, coming around this corner. Under the going onto the structure. Here, I was thinking of buying that Iowa Scale Rail sells this squealer, they call it. We get the flange squeal, which is this is definitely what we would have. This is a very type slow curve on operation here. And this whole layout is in yard limits. So, which means we don't need cabooses. We don't need to flag for the trains. We just have to get out of the way of first class trains. So it'll have an interesting sense for operation. And then lastly, here, this is the start of the steel bridge. This was the steel bridge here in Oregon. Here, this is a double deck lift bridge with the road on top. So again, more or less in this kind of position here, with the rail on the bottom. And we'll actually, we'll be able to model here the first deck truss span that sits here, plus some of the lift tower, which is right here against this edge right here. Then once we get beyond this point here, I'm going to turn the camera here slightly. I'll get this out of the way. Here again, we'll just get into the these off stage areas here, which represent again, we'll go into the staging yards, and then back in here we can see the slot right here. This will be for that cutoff here. We won't see that because they'll be underneath the viaduct here. And this will be the connection point, representing things like passenger trains, the main line, the valley line. So that concludes our tour. If you do like more of this, please like and comment if you like, and if you want to be into first up for new videos, please subscribe. I'm not quite sure exactly timeline for working here. Ideally, once a month updates, maybe sooner if there's a lot going on. So I hope you enjoyed the tour, and thank you for watching.